My name is Amanda, and 2 weeks ago I discovered my sister-in-law had been using my credit cards to fund her secret vacation while I was having surgery. For 3 days, Rachel posted Instagram stories from a luxury resort in Mexico while telling my family she was taking care of me at the hospital. The bank investigation uncovered fraud so systematic, it landed her in federal court. Before I dive into this story of family betrayal and credit card fraud, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever had family steal from you during your most vulnerable moments, and subscribe to True Revenge for more stories where justice catches up with the people who deserve it most. I'm 29 years old and I live in Phoenix, Arizona, where I work as a dental hygienist at a busy family practice. I've always been the responsible one in my family, the person everyone calls when they need help, advice, or just someone to listen. I own my own condo, drive a reliable Honda Civic, and have worked hard to build good credit and a small emergency fund. Nothing flashy, but I'm proud of the financial stability I've created for myself. My brother Jake is 2 years older than me, and we've always been close despite our very different personalities. Where I'm careful and planned, Jake is spontaneous and optimistic. He met Rachel 3 years ago at a friend's wedding, and they had one of those whirlwind romances that seemed straight out of a romantic comedy. Rachel was bubbly, outgoing, and seemed to bring out a more adventurous side in Jake. They got engaged after 8 months and married 6 months later. Rachel Thompson became Rachel Martinez when she married my brother, but she never really became part of our family in the way I'd hoped. She was always friendly enough at family gatherings, but there was something about her that I couldn't quite pin down. She had expensive tastes for someone who worked part-time as a yoga instructor, always wearing designer clothes and carrying luxury handbags that seemed way above her budget. Jake worked as a project manager for a construction company and made decent money, but not enough to support Rachel's lifestyle preferences. I noticed he'd started looking stressed about money, especially after they moved into a more expensive apartment that Rachel had insisted on. When I asked him about it, he'd brush off my concerns and say everything was fine, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Rachel had a habit of making comments about money that rubbed me the wrong way. She'd complain about not being able to afford vacations like her friends, or make passive-aggressive remarks about people who were too careful with their money. Once, at a family barbecue, she mentioned how nice it must be to have no one to spend money on but yourself, looking directly at me when she said it. I let it slide, but it stung. 3 months ago, I started experiencing severe abdominal pain that I initially attributed to stress from work. Our dental practice had been short-staffed, and I'd been pulling extra shifts while dealing with particularly difficult patients. Pain would come and go, sometimes sharp, sometimes a dull ache that made it hard to focus on anything else. I'm not someone who runs to the doctor for every little thing. I have good insurance through work, but I've always been the type to tough it out and hope problems resolve themselves. So when the pain first started, I tried treating it with over-the-counter medications and assumed it would pass. But 3 weeks ago, the pain became unbearable. I was at work, cleaning a patient's teeth, when a wave of agony hit me so suddenly and intensely that I had to excuse myself and rush to the bathroom. I was doubled over, sweating, and felt like I might pass out. My colleague, Dr. Martinez, found me there and immediately insisted on taking me to the emergency room. The doctor diagnosed me with acute appendicitis and said I needed surgery immediately. The appendix was inflamed and close to rupturing, which could have been life-threatening if I'd waited any longer. Within 2 hours of arriving at the hospital, I was being prepped for emergency surgery. I was scared and alone, and the medical team was moving so quickly that I barely had time to process what was happening. The anesthesiologist was explaining the procedure while nurses were starting IVs and asking about my medical history. In the chaos, I realized I needed to call someone to let them know where I was. I called Jake first, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried my parents, who live about 4 hours away in Tucson. Mom answered on the second ring, and when I explained what was happening, she immediately said they'd drive up to Phoenix. But the surgeon said they needed to operate within the hour, and I knew my parents wouldn't make it in time. That's when I called Rachel. She answered on the third ring, sounding slightly annoyed until I explained the situation. "Oh my God, Amanda, that's terrible," she said, and for a moment she sounded genuinely concerned. "Jake's at a work site about an hour away, but I'll call him right now. And I'll come to the hospital immediately. Don't worry about anything else." I felt relief wash over me. Whatever issues I'd had with Rachel seemed petty in that moment. She was family, and she was dropping everything to be there for me during a medical emergency. "Thank you so much," I told her. "My purse is in my car in the hospital parking garage, level 2, space 247. Keys are with the nurse at registration. If you could grab my insurance card and maybe bring some comfortable clothes for when I wake up, I'd really appreciate it." "Of course," Rachel said. "I'll take care of everything. Just focus on getting through the surgery safely." The last thing I remember before going under anesthesia was feeling grateful that I had family who would be there for me when I needed them most. I woke up 6 hours later in the recovery room, groggy and disoriented but alive. The surgery had gone well, and the surgeon explained that they'd removed my appendix just in time. Another few hours, and it could have ruptured, which would have meant a much more serious situation. Jake was sitting beside my bed, looking worried and relieved. "Hey there, Sleeping Beauty," he said, squeezing my hand gently. "You scared us for a while, but the doctor says you're going to be fine." "Where's Rachel?" I asked, looking around the room. Jake's expression shifted slightly. "She had to run home to grab some things for you, but she'll be back soon. She's been here most of the day." That seemed reasonable. I was touched that Rachel had spent her day at the hospital waiting for me to wake up. Maybe I'd been too quick to judge her character. Over the next 2 days, Rachel visited regularly, bringing me magazines, flowers, and updates from Jake about my recovery progress. She seemed attentive and caring, asking the nurses about my condition and making sure I was comfortable. When my parents arrived the next day, Rachel graciously stepped back to give them time with me while maintaining that she was happy to help with anything they needed. "Rachel's been wonderful," my mom told me privately. "She's really stepped up during this whole ordeal. I think we may have underestimated her." I felt guilty for my previous suspicions about Rachel. Here she was, proving herself to be exactly the kind of sister-in-law I'd always hoped for, and I'd been judging her based on superficial observations about her spending habits. The doctor discharged me after 3 days with instructions to take it easy for 2 weeks and avoid lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds. Rachel offered to help with grocery shopping and cleaning, and Jake arranged to work from home for a few days to make sure I was settling back into my routine safely. I spent the first week of recovery mostly sleeping and catching up on Netflix shows I'd been meaning to watch. My energy levels were low, and I was taking prescription pain medication that made me drowsy. I wasn't paying much attention to anything beyond the basics of eating, sleeping, and gradually getting back on my feet. It was during my second week of recovery that my phone started buzzing with text alerts from my bank. The first alert came on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee. "Unusual activity detected on your Chase Sapphire account. If you did not authorize a charge of $347.82 at Paradiso Resort Cancun, please call immediately." I stared at the text, confused. I definitely hadn't authorized any charges in Cancun. I hadn't authorized any charges anywhere, actually, since I'd been home recovering for over a week. I called the fraud hotline immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm showing multiple charges on your account over the past 3 days that appear to be vacation-related," the fraud specialist explained. "Resort charges, airline fees, restaurant bills, all from the Cancun area. The total so far is $3,247.82. My heart started racing. I've been home recovering from surgery. I haven't used my credit cards at all this week. I'm placing a fraud alert on your account immediately and will need you to come into a branch to file a formal dispute. Can you think of anyone who might have had access to your cards?" That's when the horrible realization hit me. Rachel had gone to my car to get my insurance card. She'd had access to my entire purse, including my wallet, while I was unconscious in surgery. But that was impossible. Rachel was my sister-in-law. She'd been taking care of me. She'd spent days at the hospital making sure I was okay. There had to be some other explanation. "I'll come in tomorrow," I told the fraud specialist, my mind racing through possibilities that all seemed equally unthinkable. I hung up and immediately checked my Instagram, something I'd barely looked at during my recovery. That's when I saw them. Rachel's Instagram stories from the past 3 days. Photos of a pristine beach with turquoise water. A luxury resort pool with palm trees. Drinks with little umbrellas. Gourmet meals with ocean views. And Rachel herself, smiling and relaxed, clearly on vacation in what looked exactly like Cancun. But that was impossible. Rachel had been visiting me in Phoenix. She'd brought me magazines and flowers. She'd talked to the nurses about my condition. I scrolled through the timestamps on her posts. The first beach photo was posted at 2:47 p.m. on Saturday. That was the same day she'd visited me in the afternoon, bringing soup and asking how I was feeling. Unless she'd pre-posted the photos or unless someone else had access to her Instagram account, there was only one explanation. Rachel had been in Cancun while telling my family she was taking care of me in Phoenix. Called Jake immediately. "Jake, where did you think Rachel was for the past 3 days?" "What do you mean?" "She's been helping take care of you." "Why?" "Jake, I need you to sit down. Rachel hasn't been taking care of me. She's been in Cancun, Mexico, and I think she's been using my credit cards to pay for it." There was a long silence. "Amanda, that's impossible. Rachel told me she was spending every day with you. She said you were having a rough recovery and needed extra support." "Jake, look at her Instagram right now." Another silence, longer this time. Then I heard Jake's sharp intake of breath. "These photos are from this weekend," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She told me she was with you this weekend. Jake, someone used my credit cards to charge over $3,000 in Cancun in the past 3 days. Rachel had access to my wallet when I was in surgery." I could hear Jake moving around, probably pacing, which was what he did when he was trying to process difficult information. "There has to be an explanation," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe someone stole her phone and posted those photos. Maybe the credit card thing is a coincidence. Jake, I need you to ask Rachel directly where she's been for the past 3 days. And I need you to ask her if she took anything from my wallet besides my insurance card." "She's supposed to be home tonight," Jake said. "Her flight lands at 8 p.m. "Her flight from where, Jake?" Another silence. "She told me she was driving back from helping you." That's when we both realized the extent of what Rachel had done. She'd used my medical emergency as cover for a vacation she couldn't afford, funded with my stolen credit card information, while lying to my brother about her whereabouts for 3 straight days. I drove to Jake and Rachel's apartment that evening, arriving just as Rachel was walking up to the front door with a small rolling suitcase and a tan that definitely hadn't come from Phoenix in November. "Amanda," she said, looking genuinely surprised to see me. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be resting? Rachel, where have you been for the past 3 days?" Her expression flickered for just a moment before settling back into concern. "I've been helping take care of you, of course. I was just running errands today. You look like you should be in bed. Rachel, I saw your Instagram posts from Cancun." Color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, those. I posted those from a trip Jake and I took last month. I just forgot to post them earlier. Rachel, they're time-stamped from this weekend. And someone used my credit cards to pay for a vacation in Cancun starting exactly when you told Jake you were taking care of me." Rachel looked like she might be sick. She glanced toward the apartment door, probably hoping Jake wasn't home yet, but his car was clearly visible in the parking lot. "Amanda, I can explain." "I'm listening." Rachel sat down heavily on the steps leading to her apartment. "I've been having some financial problems that Jake doesn't know about. I have credit card debt from before we got married, and the minimum payments were getting impossible to manage. So you decided to steal from me while I was having surgery?" It wasn't supposed to be stealing. I was going to pay you back before you even noticed. I just needed to get away for a few days to clear my head and figure out a plan. The vacation was already booked months ago and I couldn't get a refund. Rachel, you charged over $3,000 to my credit cards. I know, and I'm going to pay every penny back. I just needed more time. You lied to Jake about where you were. You lied to my parents. You made everyone think you were taking care of me while you were partying in Mexico. I panicked, okay? Once I'd already used your cards, I didn't know how to explain where I was getting the money for the trip. So I thought if I just pretended to be helping you, I could pay you back quietly and no one would ever have to know. That's when Jake opened the front door. He'd clearly been listening from inside. Rachel, is this true? Rachel looked between Jake and me, and I could see her calculating whether there was any way to salvage the situation with more lies. But the evidence was overwhelming, and she knew it. Jake, I can fix this. It was just a mistake, and I'll make it right. You stole from my sister while she was having emergency surgery, and then you lied to me about it for 3 days. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Jake's voice was calm, but I could see the anger and disappointment in his eyes. This wasn't just about money, it was about betrayal of trust at the deepest level. The bank investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Rachel had taken photos of my credit cards with her phone while I was in surgery, then used the information to pay for flights, hotels, meals, and activities during her Cancun vacation. The digital trail was perfect. Her flight reservations, her hotel bookings, her restaurant charges, all paid for with my stolen credit card information. But the most damaging evidence was the timeline the bank created. While Rachel was posting Instagram stories from a luxury resort, she was texting Jake about how I was having a rough day and needed extra emotional support. While she was charging spa treatments to my credit card, she was telling my parents about what a trooper I was being during recovery. The bank's fraud investigator explained that this type of systematic credit card fraud, especially involving family members and exploitation of medical emergencies, was considered particularly serious. The fact that Rachel had planned the vacation in advance and used my surgery as cover showed premeditation. Mrs. Thompson, we're recommending this case be forwarded to federal prosecutors, the investigator told me. The amount involved, the interstate nature of the fraud, and the exploitation of a medical emergency make this a strong candidate for federal charges. I had to make a decision about whether to press charges against my brother's wife. Jake was devastated, both by Rachel's betrayal and by the position it put our family in. My parents were heartbroken that their new daughter-in-law had exploited their daughter's medical crisis. But Rachel had committed a serious crime, and she'd done it while I was at my most vulnerable. She'd stolen my money, violated my trust, lied to my family, and used my medical emergency as cover for her deception. I decided to press charges. The federal prosecutor's office picked up the case, and Rachel was charged with credit card fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The evidence was so overwhelming that her lawyer advised her to take a plea deal rather than go to trial. Rachel ultimately pled guilty to federal credit card fraud charges. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $8,247 in restitution, which included not just the original charges but also penalties and the costs of the bank's investigation. Jake filed for divorce before Rachel's sentencing hearing. He told me later that it wasn't just about the money she'd stolen, it was about the realization that he'd never really known who he'd married. The woman who could steal from his sister during a medical emergency wasn't someone he could trust with his heart or his future. The financial impact was significant but manageable. My insurance covered most of my medical expenses, and the bank eventually reimbursed me for all of Rachel's fraudulent charges. But the emotional damage took much longer to heal. I felt violated in a way that went beyond simple theft. Rachel had been in my hospital room asking about my recovery, bringing me flowers, all while knowing she'd stolen thousands of dollars from me. She'd looked my parents in the eye and accepted their gratitude for taking such good care of me, knowing she'd been in Mexico the entire time. The betrayal changed how I think about trust and family. I'd always been someone who assumed the best of people, especially family members. Rachel's actions taught me that some people are capable of exploiting even the most vulnerable situations for personal gain. But there were also unexpected positives. Jake and I became closer through the experience. Having his marriage implode because of his wife's betrayal of his sister brought us together in a way we hadn't experienced since childhood. He felt guilty about bringing Rachel into our family, and I felt bad that my medical emergency had led to the destruction of his marriage. "You didn't destroy my marriage," Jake told me during one of our conversations after Rachel's sentencing. "Rachel destroyed my marriage when she decided to steal from you. I'm just grateful we found out who she really was before we had kids or bought a house together." Jake started therapy to process the betrayal and to understand how he'd missed the signs of Rachel's character problems. He realized that many of the financial pressures in their marriage had probably been caused by Rachel's undisclosed debt and spending habits, not by their lifestyle choices. My parents struggled with guilt about having welcomed Rachel into the family and praised her for stepping up during my medical crisis. They felt like they should have seen through her performance, but I reminded them that Rachel had fooled everyone, including Jake, who'd lived with her for 2 years. The experience changed how I handle my personal information and financial security. I now use a small purse that contains only the essentials when I travel, and I keep my credit cards in a separate, more secure location. I've also set up more aggressive fraud monitoring on all my accounts. But perhaps most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts about people. I'd always had subtle concerns about Rachel's character, but I'd dismissed them as petty or judgmental. Now I understand that those instincts were trying to tell me something important about who she really was. Rachel served 14 months of her 18-month sentence and was released early for good behavior. She's required to continue making restitution payments, though at her current income level it will take years to fully repay what she stole. Jake told me she moved back to her hometown after her release and is working at a retail store while living with her parents. I don't wish Rachel any particular harm, but I also don't forgive her. What she did was calculated, cruel, and targeted at someone who was at their most vulnerable. She exploited a medical emergency for personal gain and then lied about it while accepting gratitude from the family she was betraying. The most important lesson from this experience is about the difference between forgiveness and accountability. Some people argue that families should forgive and move on, but Rachel's actions had real consequences that went far beyond money. She destroyed trust, manipulated a medical crisis, and showed a level of callousness that can't be excused or overlooked. Justice doesn't always feel satisfying, but in this case, it felt necessary. Rachel faced real consequences for her actions, and those consequences sent a message that exploiting someone's medical emergency is a serious crime with serious penalties. I've fully recovered from my appendix surgery, both physically and financially. My credit was never seriously damaged because I caught the fraud quickly, and the bank's investigation was thorough and professional. The scar from my surgery has faded to almost nothing, and I rarely think about the medical aspect of this experience anymore. What I do think about is the importance of protecting yourself even from family members and the value of pressing charges when crimes are committed against you. Some people suggested I was being too harsh by pursuing federal charges against my sister-in-law, but Rachel's actions were federal crimes, and she deserved to face the full consequences. If you've ever been betrayed by someone during a vulnerable time, know that seeking justice isn't about revenge, it's about accountability and protection. People who exploit medical emergencies, family crises, or other vulnerable situations need to understand that their actions have serious consequences. Trust is precious, especially during times of crisis. When someone violates that trust to steal from you, fighting back isn't just about recovering what was taken. It's about refusing to let someone's greed turn your moment of vulnerability into their opportunity for profit. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and seeking justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about standing up for yourself even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your vulnerability doesn't give others permission to take advantage of you. Sometimes the people who seem most caring are the ones you need to watch most carefully.